Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I am a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. Welcome back to the podcast. Today on the show, we're wrapping up our series on the Austin serial bombings of 2018 by going through some of the lessons learned from this incident. And if you missed the first two parts of the series, I highly recommend going back to hear about all of the details of this incident. So head there and then come back once you finish up with that. So to start us off today, Sam, can you tell us what were some of the most significant friction points or failure points in the investigation process and how you all responded to this incident?
Sure. Thanks, Ashley. So we start off with the first episode was very detailed about how this all played out, right? The incidents, the bombings, and our victims, and the desperate search to find the suspect. Second episode, we have the actual takedown, which is exciting and a definite win for us and for everybody involved. But there's so much, and I definitely, I talked about the heroic efforts of our bomb squads, our EOD units, not just the Austin Police Departments, but our federal partners, the San Antonio Police Bomb Squad, the Houston Police Bomb Squad, and the Texas Department of Public Safety. Just magnificent efforts, and our SWAT team that was able to execute the final takedown. Just fantastic, magnificent, and those are your highlights, right? Everybody likes to hear that. It's exciting and it's fun, but there's so much going on behind the scenes, and that those great movie type things, cinematic pieces where we're doing defusing bombs, we're taking vehicles down. Those are great, but the heroic efforts of the larger investigative piece of this, that we're actually able to put the pieces together through details, through grinding through these things, talking to people over and over again, reviewing data, reviewing videos, and putting the pieces together. That's what led us to be able to do that. So I don't want to pay them any kind of short shrift. They were heroic in their own right, just doing the hard work of getting those things done. Now, as far as so we have a command post set up, a larger command post that encompassed Austin PD, it encompassed our federal partners, it encompassed every stakeholder that had this, to include our elected leaders, media, and everybody that was desperately seeking information. And I felt that we used the media to great effect. But there's a double-edged sword right there. We're talking about failure and friction points. The traditional friction points that one might imagine that might be taking place between a municipal or local law enforcement and federal law enforcement, just that we didn't see that. We had really, really solid communication, cooperation, and what we like to call patch-to-patch working relationship and leadership, shoulder to shoulder, face to face, one command post, one unified command. We were able to use the principles of ICS to kind of have a layered response structure towards this, all through a central clearinghouse of the command post. So you had the investigative component, you had the leadership component in the command post, and the coordination, command and coordination control. And then you had the operations section of this, which was our absolutely fantastic patrol response to this, from our patrol officers to our EOD partners and our Austin Police EOD unit and our Austin Police SWAT unit. So all of that working in concert went really, really well. There wasn't the typical or the assumed or perceived typical turf wars, no parochial, this is mine, this is yours. That really did a great job of being one voice. And it was decided early on amongst the leadership that our police chief at the time was Brian Manley for the Austin Police Department. He would be the face of this. He's the local law enforcement leader. He's the police chief. It would, and I happen to agree with this, it's more appropriate coming from the local law enforcement who people know they have a face associated with the chief of police in the city. He was the one passing the message, hey, we don't want to cause panic. We want everybody to have a heightened sense of situational awareness. These are things to be looking out for. These are the dangers, and this is what we ask of the community. And this differed from the Boston Marathon bombing investigation in that they were able to identify suspects fairly early on there. The suspects were mobile, and they showed themselves ready to fight it out with the cops, as we saw in Watertown, Massachusetts, during that event. And they shut the entire area down. Another great example of cooperation. But we didn't have that. That happened very quickly after we identified the suspect. So your traditional friction points, they really didn't come into play. But the friction failure points, and there was no real cascading system failures in the response, but there were things that did not go as well as we had hoped. Some examples are initially there was no assumption, but the friction of having nothing to go on, the whodunit nature of the initial explosions, especially the first three. The absolute frustrating fact that we have people that have been murdered, we have people that have been maimed and scarred for life, and not only were we not able to protect them on the front end, but we don't know when, where, how, or who it'll happen again. After the third one, you realize, well, this guy's been incredibly successful, or guys, the suspect or suspects, and not having a direction to proceed, it's incredibly frustrating. So the operations section, whereas the EOD guys are going out, and that's possibly another friction point, they're going out and they're handling 2,300 calls for service. Having call our partner units in from other metro areas in the state, which is highly atypical, as well as our federal partners or state partners, just to start going through all of these calls to go and check these things out. Because you got to do that, right? You've got to look and make sure that none of these are viable devices. So that's a friction point, but a necessary one. The incredible volume of people calling in on just various stuff they feel connected to this, because there's fear in the community now, right? Having a population in fear is a horrible and frustrating experience for law enforcement, because that shows, and for right, wrong, indifferent, now it feels like a failure in our mission to keep everybody, protect and serve. Well, at least the perception is the public's probably looking at us like we have failed in both of those missions. We have not protected them. We're not serving, at least in the aspect that we're not making them feel safe. So we have that going. The time it took 18 plus days to get this thing under control. The backdrop of it being in a metro area, it's not out in the boonies or anything like that. It's not out in rural areas of our metro. It's in residential areas, which, if people can't feel safe in their homes, I mean, where can they feel safe? Mm-hmm. And the music festival going on, and we have our worst fears is a mass casualty, a complex coordinated attack taking place in our jurisdiction. And whereas this is not a traditional complex coordinated attack that one would think about, like Paris or in 2015 or something like that, where things took place in a relatively compressed amount of time, it is a complex coordinated attack in that we have a suspect using a weapon system that is indiscriminate, is incredibly dangerous and incredibly volatile, uh, going in an undistinguishable pattern across a metro area across 18 days. So it is a complex coordinated attack. It's just a longer period of time. And being that it's a series, it is one attack when you really get down to how we look at that in the industry. So the incredible frustration and the incredible lack of workable, actionable intelligence for the first three, that was really the friction points. We didn't see friction points in the response. We saw friction points in the activity of the suspect, and not providing us with the type of information that we needed to interdict, apprehend, and stop this thing until we get to the tripwire incident in Southwest Austin, which got us moving the ball downfield towards identifying him. And then the mailed packages through FedEx were actually able to identify the origin of the packages. We're able to interdict one of the packages and render it safe. And then we developed the suspect. Once we have the suspect, oh my goodness, that felt like a victory in itself. It is, but so that's good news. The bad news is, okay, now we got to figure out a way to apprehend him without getting anybody else hurt. Not to mention our responders hurt in this incredibly complex set of circumstances. Again, not your normal barricaded suspect, not your normal criminal suspect. You got a guy that's a walking, talking bomb. So that brings a whole different series of concerns and tactics, techniques, and procedures that we have to use in order to grab them. And at the end of the day, if you listen to the second episode, a lot of those things were out of our control at the end. The things that were in our control was we could stop him, but some of the mitigating factors that we were putting in place to lessen the risk for us and others, we were unable to achieve those at the end. And we were forced to place ourselves. And when I say ourselves, of course, I was not part of the takedown team, but our SWAT operators, they were forced to place themselves in a position where they were at great personal risk. But being that that's their job, they swore to do that, they're committed to doing that. They did it just magnificently and flawlessly.
Absolutely. I mean, aside from all of the, the complication involved in all of the interagency relationships and communication, things like that, just with the suspect, you have a change in tactic, a change in location, a change in the type of victim.
Exactly.
If can you imagine if he hadn't bought that sign, and now you have, a few bombings that look similar in residential locations, but then you have this tripwire. So that's a change in, tactic in these attacks.
Exactly.
It's fascinating.
You're looking for a pattern, of course.
Yeah.
And patterns can lead you to at least a category of suspect, at least a general type of suspect. Initially, we didn't have that. There was no pattern other than he's placing devices that are victim initiated on porches. Well, in a city of over 1 million people, a metro area of 2.7 million people, that's a lot of porches. And we have no pattern. So, okay, if we isolate it just to the city of Austin and just to the eastern side of the city of Austin, that's still a lot of porches. So, and we have no information. So it's incredibly difficult. You can't put people out there to watch every neighborhood. You can't put any amount of resources that are going to actually move the dial. You have to develop actionable intelligence that will point us in at least a general direction. And don't get me wrong, there were people tirelessly working on that. And given enough time, there might have been something there in those first few that would have eventually led us to identify him. But in a situation like this, time is not one of the factors that we have an abundance of. And there's no such thing as time being on anybody's side. Time is up for grabs for us or for the suspect. And we can use time to our benefit, but with no pattern and just waiting for the next one to go off, which we weren't doing, but that's how it looks. Time was actually our adversary in this, because unless we get this guy identified, we're not going to be able to get him stopped unless he makes a mistake or dumb luck. One thing you can't wait. Dumb luck's not a plan. It's not a strategy. It's not. It's not for. It's not a successful way to prosecute this. The only way we're going to do this is through hard work of people working it tirelessly and being committed to doing that. And that's what we saw. We are very fortunate that the suspect made a series of errors, and we certainly don't want to make this a roadmap to success for suspects. But the suspect did, like you said, did change the pattern, did never establish a pattern, but did change their tactics, that how he was going to go about it, which ultimately led us to identifying him. Once he's identified, well, then again, time's still not on our side, but it's now it becomes a resource for us that we can use against the suspect, and we did that. You can press the suspect's timeline, you can press the suspect's options, you can press the suspect's situational awareness and decision-making ability. Well, then we can start using that to our favor as a weapon in itself. We were able to do that, but at the end, time became up for grabs again, and we were forced to do something before we wanted to do it, but we were ready to do it because we needed to.
Yeah. Did just out of curiosity, did the suspect ever reveal why he decided to ship things via FedEx? Like, what, it seems like, not that he was smart in the earlier ones at all, but you would think like, oh, I'm having success doing this thing, or success in his mind. That seems like something that like would get him identified really easily. Do you think he was just trying different things just to see what would happen, or did he ever reveal anything like that?
So without getting into the weeds of his quote unquote manifesto that he recorded, if you heard the last episode, prior to the takedown, he was in a unrelated hotel parking lot, recording a manifesto on his phone that we were able to recover and view. He doesn't get detailed about how or why he chose specific tactics, or how or why he chose specific people. So that remains a bit of a mystery. But he did give some indication as to why he was overall doing all this stuff. And even if we revealed that to an open source audience, it wouldn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to people that are rational and aren't interested in killing people. So it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make a difference anyway. His reasons don't matter. At the end of the day, he's not someone we wish to. We're certainly never going to publish a manifesto by him. He was just at the end of the day, he was a murderer who used a complex method to murder people, and certainly not a sympathetic figure. Now, what we also found out once we went and did the post-blast investigation at his residence, and once the search warrant took place, our bomb squad, or EOD, first has to methodically search and render safe a residence. He had back at his residence, he had like a lock on his bedroom door. He was very private. Finding out from his roommates, they weren't like buddy roommates like a lot of people would be. He was just a guy that lived there, was quiet, kept to himself. Sounds like a job description for a disenfranchised serial killer. But in his personal area of the house, he had a significant amount of explosive materials that could have been used to make a much larger device, the kind of device that we were worried that would wind up downtown. So he had the wherewithal to do that. And and a lot of people will ask themselves during this, well, where did this guy get the knowledge to do that? Was he former military? Did he learn this from a organized group? No. Sadly, if a person's dedicated and committed, the internet has a wealth of resources where people can learn stuff. Unfortunately, fortunately for the right reasons, but unfortunately for situations like this. So he was able to develop knowledge and do this by he's basically and while the law enforcement has never come out, our department, FBI more importantly, because they're the clearinghouse for this, has never come out and said this was an act of terrorism. He was a domestic terrorist. But the category that this suspect would most neatly fit into would be a homegrown violent extremist, right? So, and that's a designation that FBI and Homeland Security has designated, and that's the category this individual fits into. So whereas we're not, has never been officially called an act of terrorism, it definitely was a complex coordinated attack perpetrated by a homegrown violent extremist. So the individual viewer, the individual listener can draw their own conclusions from that. But we found that he was not connected to any groups. He was not connected to any other people. This was a person that acted on their own, acted for their own twisted reasons. But unfortunately, he was very successful at the onset of the series. And it wasn't until the last 48 or so hours, once he was identified, that we were able to start finding success in this whole situation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to Sam for joining us for this series. It was incredible. Coming up in the next few weeks, we're also going to talk to Sam about another incident that he was involved in. So keep your eyes out for that. Thank you so much, Sam.
Hey, Ashley, thank you so much for having me. It's rewarding to be able to pass on some of the lessons learned and some of the experiences and there's just one small example of one person that's had these kind of experiences, but we have a cadre at NCBRT. We have a cadre full of instructors and people, professionals that have seen and done all of these type of things. And I know a lot of our viewers and listeners have seen similar things, if not quite so specific, like a bombing incident. But there's so many examples of incident response we could draw on. And at NCBRT, a couple of the courses that we have available to our public safety professionals out there, we actually have a class that's called Critical Decision Making During Complex Coordinated Terrorist Attacks, CCTAs that we call them. That's a 2-day class that we can bring to jurisdictions to get people better accustomed to working together, better accustomed to working under a response model, and really targeted at the end result, which is to reduce the amount of people that die that would not otherwise, but for our actions as public safety responders. In addition, we have the Active Threat Integrated Response course, which is an even more targeted operations level course where the individual responders and law enforcement, fire, EMS, and others actually respond to and not only isolate, distract, neutralize suspects, but also perform point of injury care and casualty evacuation to the victims of those attacks so that we can save as many lives as possible, which is what we're all trying to do, which is what we tried to do during this 18 days of real terror in Austin. And hopefully the more people we get exposed to these types of lessons learned, these types of different trainings and different national best practices and standards, the less people will die, and the more people will have the perception that we are doing our job. And the reality is that we are protecting and serving and trying to do our best for our communities throughout this nation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed doing it. See you next time.
If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.